Dear friends, a very good morning to you all, and thank you for taking this invitation and coming to the Armenian Embassy to participate to this event. And needless to say that how pleased we are to host you here today at the Embassy. The topic of our discussion is of very important nature, as you understand. Though we commemorated the 100th anniversary last year of the Armenian Genocide, but it was not the end. The issue is high on the agenda of the Armenia, of the Republic of Armenia, Armenian community around the world, and also of the international community, because what did happen to Armenian people in Western Armenia in 1915, it's not only a tragedy of one people. The scope and the meaning and the nature of that tragedy transcends all imaginable borders, limits of humanity. And that's why it's so important to keep a close eye and to devote additional efforts to promote the cause of the recognition of Armenian genocide, to be followed by paying tribute to the innocent lives that perished during those calamitous years, and then to bring truth and historical justice to the forefront and achieve the just cause of the Armenian people with the restoration of the rights that have been so violently infringed upon during those years. So now I'm particularly pleased to welcome and introduce the participants of this roundtable discussion. And I will start from here, from the left, Minister Nazayan, you're most welcome here. The members of the Lebanese Parliament are sitting around this table, distinguished members of the Lebanese Parliament, and Gerald, you're also very much welcome. And we have also very distinguished scholars who will be participating to today's discussion. Ms. Raina Sarkis from the Human Rights Association of Lebanon, Ms. Kvetsa Pertekian from the American University of Lebanon, Ms. Dranik from the University. I think today's discussion will be focusing partially on the history of the genocide, and then why did it happen, how did it happen. There is abundant evidence, and there is no need to prove that the Armenian genocide did happen. And it has been proved so many times, not only by Armenian scholars, but very distinguished scholars around the world. We don't need to prove it again. We need to educate the fact of genocide, to present to the wider public around the world, to different societies that still lack that knowledge, and to show them the historic truth. Also, one of our major tasks remains to counter the nihilist policies of Turkey, which continue to develop, and they have taken the form of institution. That policy of denialism has been intentionally institutionalized by the Turkish government and pursues the goal of not only negating the fact of Armenian genocide, but also applying new, more subtle approaches to that negation, which are the rationalization of revitalization or even trivialization of the effect of Armenian genocide. These are very worrying trends, and we need to double or triple our collective efforts not to allow that to take root or to mislead, misguide the international community and deviate the focus that we all have been trying to have on the issue of Armenian genocide. So these are the major topics that I presume that will be discussed in the course of our debate on this paper. And the first speaker to this discussion, I will invite Professor David Phillips. He came to Beirut particularly to take part to this event and other events that will be taking tonight and tomorrow in the evening. He has a very distinguished career. I have it that I can read it out, but I don't want to do all that, but whether you all, because he is a very prominent name and he is a very thoughtful scholar trying to reveal the exact facts, historical facts, and also to present how the issue has been evolving and taking new shapes and how it should be tackled in our current situation under current circumstances. So I will give the floor to Professor Phillips, and then we'll proceed with other speakers. We have currently 4 speakers around this table. I will suggest to give the floor to all of them and then have an interactive discussion for your questions put to the speakers and also with your comments. And you are free to make your comments also to present your views on the issues that will be brought up during the current discussion. Please, you have one.
Your Excellency, Mr. Minister, members of Parliament, and distinguished guests. It's a great honor for me to be here this morning and join this panel. Privileged to talk about the Armenian Genocide and the work that I've been involved in over almost 2 decades to try to gain recognition of the events of genocide and to foster a dialogue internationally, including between Turks and Armenians, about how the past, present, and future can be shaped in order to advance this greater goal of mutual understanding and regional cooperation. Let me just explain first how I got involved in this topic. I had done some work in the 1990s with Pantheon University in Athens and Sabancı University in Istanbul. And one of the projects that we developed was a shared history project. We brought together groups of scholars to talk about what the Turks referred to as the fire of Izmir, and the Greeks called the burning of Smyrna. We published some joint papers, we published some parallel papers. This effort was part of a broader effort to engage civil society in Greece and Turkey on a range of issues, from counterterrorism to narcotics interdiction to maritime management. And those working groups evolved into formal treaty obligations. I did this in cooperation with the U.S. Department of State and had close ties there with Ambassador Holbrooke and Undersecretary Mark Grossman. Mr. Grossman called me into his office one day, and he exalted the work that we had done between Greece and Turkey, and he asked if we could do something similar between Turks and Armenians. He warned me that this would be the hardest assignment that I would ever take on. But being full of bravado and optimism, I gladly welcomed the assignment and started by meeting and interviewing some of the leading members of the Armenian American community. One person in particular, Mr. Van Krikorian, who's now the co-chairman of the Armenian Assembly of America, and I collaborated closely. And Van made it very clear at the outset of our discussions that there was no shared history project. There was only one version of history. That was the right version of history. And it was a history of the Armenian Genocide. And the Armenians wouldn't countenance any discussion among historians or politicians that raised question about whether the events constituted genocide. So right away, there was a red line drawn. And I had to try to operate on the other side of that red line to foster a dialogue about some practical issues. But this question of history, the History Commission, kept recurring. It was doggedly pursued by the Turkish side because they felt that an institutional history commission would be a way of undermining what they asserted were Armenian claims of genocide. So what I wanted to do today is to talk a little bit about how the question of history commissions factored into the relations and negotiations between Turkey and Armenia, to try to extrapolate some lessons learned from that experience. And then together, I hope during the discussion with the wisdom and contributions of the other panelists, to think about what we do to go forward given the extremely difficult period that we face now and the intense chauvinism that is exhibited in anger, not only towards Armenians, but towards the United States and the West in general. The idea of a history commission was first raised in 1998 by a gentleman named Kaan Soya, who is the founder of the Turkish-Armenian Business Development Committee. With the election in 2002 of the Justice and Development Party, Mr. Soya took that proposal initially to Prime Minister Gül in 2002, and then to Prime Minister Erdogan the following year, after his conviction for inciting divisions in society using religion was overturned, and he was able to be a member of parliament and become Prime Minister. According to Mr. Soya, the reaction that he got from Prime Minister Erdogan was, why not discuss history? We're Turks, we have nothing to fear. This attitude of Mr. Erdogan is pervasive and has always defined Turkey's approach to Armenians, but also towards this question of historical dialogue. On the 10th of April in 2005, Erdogan wrote a letter to President Kocharyan in which he proposed a joint history commission to study the events in the early 20th century. In his letter, he said, "We're extending an invitation to your country to establish a joint group of historians and other experts from the two countries to study the developments and events of 1915, not only as a contribution to Turkish and Armenian reconciliation, but also involving third countries, so they can share the findings with the international public. I believe that this initiative would shed light on a, quote, disputed period of history and also constitute a step towards normalization of relations." Well, President Kocharyan immediately saw this proposal for what it was, which was a trap. It was an effort to engage Armenians in a dialogue, the basis of which would be to determine if, in fact, the Armenian genocide had occurred. The proposal was conveyed through Turkey's ambassador to Georgia at the time, a gentleman named Ertan Tezgul, who had been known as Secretary for the Caucasus, man that I've met, who's a well-schooled diplomat with good diplomatic skills. He conveyed the letter to his counterpart, Armenian Genocide, also an extremely skilled diplomat who has a long history, both as an envoy during the Soviet Union period and also of Armenia. Mr. Kirikosian immediately saw the proposal for what it was, but the Armenian government very cleverly didn't discard the proposal out of hand. They thought about how the historical dialogue could be part of a broader framework of bilateral issues, including the restoration of diplomatic relations and the opening of the border, in order to advance the greater goal of normalization for Armenia, not only with Turkey, but internationally. The proposal that Erdogan made in his letter was welcomed by foreign governments. An Assistant Secretary of State endorsed the proposal. The Swiss president similarly endorsed it. The Turkish Grand National Assembly, their parliament, passed a consensus declaration in support of a Joint History Commission. With all of this acclamation, there were red flags raised about the intentions behind it and also the procedures that were being proposed. This kind of a diplomatic communication should normally have been kept secret, but the Turkish government leaked the document to the Turkish press. There was great fanfare and reporting in Turkish media about it. And then President Gül made a statement on the 10th of April in which he declared Turkey's intentions to try to engage in a historical dialogue. President Kachar waited till after the genocide memorial anniversary on the 24th, and the following day, he wrote a letter in response in which he proposed an intergovernmental commission on all bilateral issues. The question of sequencing arose. If there was to be an intergovernmental commission, would this historical dialogue be a subcommission? Would the historical dialogue come first and then be followed with the establishment of an intergovernmental commission? Of course, the Turks wanted the discussion of history to precede a discussion of all other matters. This was part of a political strategy that had been adopted in anger to try to promote Turkey's interests and delegitimize the claims of Armenians. There were a series of meetings to discuss the modalities of establishing an intergovernmental commission. There were 3 meetings that were held in Vienna. Leading the Armenian delegation was the Deputy Foreign Minister Armen Kirikosyan, and the Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs Ahmet Aluncu headed the Turkish side. There were no mediators in the room. There was a Swiss official who was invited as a quick observer and as a resource person, but the discussions were really bilateral between Turkish and Armenian officials. And they discussed the composition of various commissions, whether there be one commission and subcommissions. The Turks wanted there to be 2 relatively independent commissions, one on history, the other on bilateral issues. So you can see that the question about structure was really a way of trying to set the political agenda for what would transpire in these talks and how the Turkish side and also the Armenian side could control the outcome in order to advance their national interests. There were a series of meetings on the margins of the UN General Assembly involving Switzerland's foreign minister and president and the Turkish and Armenian delegations. And it was decided that Switzerland would play a role as the facilitator. Swiss facilitation is different than US mediation. The Swiss are much more benign. The primary Swiss diplomat involved in this process, named Michael Emule, told me that his job was primarily to pour the coffee. I think an American mediator would have played a much more robust role, trying to keep the process on track, make sure it was even-handed and balanced. But that being said, I just want to underscore that I've had the chance to get to know Ambassador Emule. He was their State Secretary of Foreign Affairs. He's a person of extraordinary diplomatic ability, personal integrity. In fact, he's probably the right man for this job. What the Swiss proposed was to look at their own national experience with history commissions. And they introduced the Turks and Armenians to a gentleman named Professor Jean-François Bergier. The Bergier Commission in Switzerland had been involved in looking at the Swiss role during the Second World War. He was also involved in discussions about the disposition of assets that had been seized from Swiss citizens during the war. As a senior scholar with international experience dealing with sensitive issues, Berger was well suited for this task. He presented on their experience in Ankara on December 7th. He also received a delegation in Bern that was headed by Ambassador Kierkegaard, in which the Swiss experience with historical dialogue was shared. Based on this, the Swiss authorities presented a paper to both sides, which was called Dialogue Between Turkey and Armenia. And Ambuel invited the two delegations to a chalet in the Swiss countryside called Bertsanzi. Over the years, I've learned to pronounce that properly. It's a charming chalet in the mountains outside of Bern. And personal relations are very important when we're talking about difficult, contested issues. So the initial meeting in Bertsanzi was really about establishing a rapport, having a communication, and agreeing on a work plan going forward. There were a series of meetings after that in Bern, in Davos, at the Munich Security Conference, and at those meetings, the protocols on normalization of relations and opening of the border between Turkey and Armenia were gradually drafted. It's important to understand how the question of history was still contested in the protocols. The protocols included a reference to a discussion about, quote, the historical dimension with the aim to restore mutual confidence between the two nations, including impartial scientific examination of historical records and archives. Including a reference to a discussion about history was a concession from the Armenian side. It was probably a quid pro quo from the Turkey side. But what's important to note is that there was no specific history commission to consider whether the events of 1915 constituted genocide. In fact, the language here is deliberately ambiguous. A discussion about historical issues. When I asked some Armenians what that meant, they said it could mean anything. It could be interpreted by either side in order to satisfy their goals. After initialing the protocols, there was an official signing ceremony in Switzerland on the 10th of October of 2009. Foreign Minister Nalbandian was there representing the Armenian delegation. 10 minutes before the signing ceremony, which was supposed to be at 5 p.m., he requested a copy of Foreign Minister Davutoglu's remarks. Frankly, this should have happened long before, or there should have been an understanding that neither side could review what the other would say. But when Mr. Nalbandian saw what was to be presented, he was aghast. The Turkish intervention was all about a history commission to determine whether the events had been genocide. They also talked at great length about Nagorno-Karabakh. The breakthrough in negotiating the protocols involved the bifurcation of Turkish-Armenian issues from resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. There was no mention of NK anywhere in the protocols or the annexes. So rightly, Nalbandian was shocked when he saw what Davutoglu was about to say. Secretary Clinton, who was there for the signing ceremony, sharing a hotel with the Armenian delegation, immediately got involved. Nalbandian said he wouldn't sign, there would be no ceremony. Finally, there was an agreement that there would be a signing, but neither side would provide any remarks. This is classic diplomatic engineering. It's a way of kicking the can down the road, of avoiding a problem, creating the appearance of a breakthrough and a success, but it was an early and significant warning of the difficulties that would arise in the implementation of the protocols. There was finally a signing. The protocols were finalized. They were never submitted by Turkey to its parliament for ratification. And as a result of that, the protocols, which represented at the time a significant breakthrough in Turkish and Armenian relations, were never formalized. I'm not sure that there should ever have been a reference to a history dialogue in the protocols at all. When Serge Sarkisian, he was defense minister, visited Washington in 2005, he was asked about the question of historical dialogue in response to the letter that had been sent. And in his reply, he said, why do we need a history commission? The Turkish-Armenian Reconciliation Commission, called TARC, which I had the honor to lead and to chair, has already addressed this issue through a finding it facilitated with the International Center for Transitional Justice. And let me just summarize the core elements of that finding. It was a process that was led by Theodore Sorensen, a lawyer in New York who was President Kennedy's speechwriter. Both sides presented their views about history and the legal implications of history. Turkey wanted to create a circumstance where they could go to the International Court of Justice and seek a legally binding opinion. We decided that instead the TARC's colleagues would provide a non-binding finding. And that finding took almost 2 years to finalize. First, we had to agree on the language of the question. Then we had to go through a process of submitting expert testimonies. And then there was the issue of finalizing a text in response. As the facilitator, I was supposed to be an observer during each phase of this process, but between you and me, I was much more involved in both defining it and also framing the outcome. The outcome, I believe, was a win-win, and the full impact of that outcome still has not yet to materialize. It found that the Convention on the Prevention of the Crime of Genocide, which was adopted in 1948, could not be applied retroactively to the events of 1915. This is not unique to this particular hearing. In international law, no convention can be applied retroactively. There are, however, other legalities that can be used to seek reparations or make other claims in civil courts, and the finding didn't rule those out. It also determined that the crime of genocide constituted 4 elements. More than one person was killed. Those persons belonged to a particular ethnic, racial, or religious group. There was a pattern to their killing, and the perpetrators of the killing knew that the persons would die. So based on that definition, which extrapolates from the ad hoc commissions for Yugoslavia and Lebanon and the Rome statute that set up the International Criminal Court, it was concluded correctly that the events of 1915 constituted genocide, that the term could be used to refer to events that preceded the Treaty of 1948, and that politicians and historians and journalists were justified in using the term genocide to characterize the events. So that was a significant victory and a step forward from the Armenian perspective. The full impact of that study has not yet been felt. And the idea of bilateral dialogue between Armenia today and the criminal regime which is in power in Ankara is a non-starter. There's no interest on President Erdogan's side in entertaining the dialogue. In fact, he's delegitimized his administration through his Islamism, his authoritarianism, and his anti-Western views. So what do we do at this juncture to try to break the impasse? I'm just going to quickly put some ideas on the table, and then I imagine in our discussion we'll have a chance to explore them further. Civil society plays an important role. When we initiated the TARC, there was almost no contact between citizens of Turkey and Armenia. In my book on silencing the past, I have a chapter called The Thousand Flowers Bloom, and it describes this proliferation of activities involving Turks and Armenians. Those should continue. They should be better funded. Instead of having to apply for financing in each instance, the European Union or a Western government should provide an umbrella grant from which resources can be drawn to pay for this work. The business communities in Turkey and Armenia have a lot of mutual benefit through their interaction. They should be allowed to interact freely, of course, by crossing the border between Turkey and Armenia without any restriction. But whatever restrictions exist, they should continue to explore business opportunities based on mutual benefit. And meaningful third parties like Switzerland or the United States should stay involved. Secretary Clinton, who is now a candidate to be President of the United States, asserted ownership of this issue because she was the person in Switzerland at the signing of the protocols. And I would hope and expect, should she be elected president, that she would renew America's involvement. And at the most senior levels of the U.S. government, this goal of rapprochement and reconciliation would be renewed. But it should not be renewed at the expense of overlooking the crimes that have been committed in Ankara, crimes against humanity, against the Kurds in the southeast, the regular support of Turkey for extremist groups that are traveling through Turkey to Raqqa and to Syria, as well as the monopolization of domestic politics that everyone has made a standard for his administration. So even within the very narrow space that still exists, there is room for some cooperation. We should learn from our own history so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And we should continue to move forward deliberately, thoughtfully, constructively, so that the genocide gains recognition around the world. I would hope that the next president would recognize the events as genocide on the anniversary next year. I would also hope that the U.S. Congress would finally pass a resolution recognizing the genocide. If we're able to move forward with honesty and integrity, then the opportunities, the space will be created for Turkey and Armenia to also rejoin their discussion, and to do that in a way which is reality-based and advances the goal of opening the border to normal travel and trade, so that the Republic of Armenia can benefit to an opening to the world. So I thank you all for your attention and look forward to the discussion.
To normalize relations in Turkey and Armenia, and also giving us some details of diplomatic activity, which not always is successful and not always brings about the desired results. So, and also thank you for your the recommendations how to proceed. And I'm sure that there will be many reactions what you have said and what you have suggested. And then we'll continue with our discussion, and I'll ask Mr. Fiber to present his views on this topic.
Thank you, Excellency, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to be present with you today on this roundtable discussion, which I hope will be focusing on practical steps that can be taken by Lebanon and other nations of this world to make justice to the genocide of the Armenian people. Justice, remembrance, recognition, compensation, non-repetition, reconciliation are extremely complex words that I'll try to present you in my short remark that would focus mostly on the role of one nation, that is Lebanon, in that universal effort for justice for the Armenian people. I had the honor to be part of a parliament that has recognized the Armenian Genocide. In the year 2000, the Lebanese parliament passed a resolution which very clearly condoned the genocide of the Armenian people, and second, it condemned and gave absolute recognition and support to the demands of its nationals, the Armenian Lebanese, and considered that the universal recognition of the Armenian Genocide is a condition for the non-repetition of these crimes in the future. These are the three main positions that were taken in the Lebanese Parliament resolution of 2000. I'll read it again in Arabic, so it is also clearer. إن مجلس النواب اللبناني بمناسبة الذكرى 85 للمجازر المرتكبة من السلطة العثمانية عام 1915، وكان ضحيتها 1.5 مليون أرمني، يدين الإبادة الجماعية بحق الشعب الأرمني، ويعرب عن تأييده المطلق لمطالب مواطنيه الأرمن، ويعتبر أن الاعتراف الدولي بهذه الإبادة شرط أساسي لمنع جرائم مماثلة قد تحصل في المستقبل. I also had the honor to be part of the Lebanese delegation that attended last week commemoration of the centennial of the Armenian Genocide in Yerevan, and I have the distinct honor to speak on behalf of the Lebanese parliamentary delegation. In that statement, I developed further the Lebanese resolution of April 2000. And in between, just for the interaction, I also had the honor to be part of the delegation of the Interparliamentary Assembly on Orthodoxy, which the Lebanese parliament is part, that visited Armenia but also visited Nagorno-Karabakh in support of the Armenian people. And I also was asked to speak in the parliament of Nagorno-Karabakh. Little did I know that on my arrival, 2 weeks later, the parliament of Azerbaijan has sent a letter of protest to the parliament of Lebanon, protesting that I've spoken there. These are very quickly the official positions of the Lebanese parliament, and probably reflecting the position of the Lebanese government and the whole nation of Lebanon. However, just to show how much politics influence this position of principle, also last year in 2015, the Ministry of Education had granted an extraordinary holiday on the 24th of April in Lebanon, and there was a big discussion amongst the Lebanese on whether or not this was appropriate, and therefore the defenders of the interest of Turkey are still present in Lebanon, are still very strong, so the issue does remain. How can one consolidate this positioning of the Lebanese state in recognition of the Armenian Genocide, and how can we turn that recognition into action? How can we go beyond the 100th anniversary now that we have passed 1 year, one step? How can we look to the future and not only to the past and to the memorialization of the genocide? My first comment will have to do with something that I consider evident, that was stated by His Excellency the Ambassador. To start with, the Armenian Genocide is not only an Armenian issue. It's an issue for the whole community of nations. It is a crime against humanity, and therefore, I, as a Lebanese that has no family connections whatsoever with the Armenians, I'm not married to an Armenian, I have no ancestors that have any connections to Armenia, and I feel as concerned by this genocide than I would if I were an Armenian myself. And therefore, I always consider that the motto that should be applied in that context, because we need to encourage the Lebanese, and we need to encourage all nations and all citizens to be concerned, because if there's no concern, there is no action that can ensue. And I think that we should and could raise the motto that we are all Armenians when it comes to the crime of genocide. An Armenian should be the motto for everyone, including the Lebanese, that needs to be concerned. And when meetings like this are happening, I'm always sad to feel that there are a very small number of Lebanese in attendance. Lebanese of non-Armenian origin, or all Lebanese of Armenian origin. And this has to be changed. I think that in the future meetings there must be a renewed effort to include more Lebanese of non-Armenian descent in all actions related to the Armenian genocide. That's my first comment and practical recommendation. Now, second, it has been stated how important memorialization, writing of history, that one should not forget. One may ultimately forgive, but never forget the crimes of the past, because we need to learn from our past for the benefit of our future. I think Lebanon has made efforts into that direction, however, not enough. And again, this is an area for collaboration between the Armenians and Lebanese of Armenian origin and Lebanese of non-Armenian origin, that the effort of memorialization be reinforced by museums that are accessible, that are open to schools. Something has to be said in history books in Lebanon. Something has to be done with the Lebanese civil society in order not to keep the memorialization of the Armenian genocide a closed event for the Armenian Lebanese community. It must be opened up and turned into a political/social issue for all the Lebanese. Second, the question of recognition and apology. Yes, Lebanon should be part of a universal effort for others to recognize the Armenian genocide. We pride ourselves that the Lebanese parliament has recognized, and probably is the only Arab parliament to have recognized the Armenian genocide. But it is our duty, and this is where it is our duty as politicians, and I look at my colleagues and others, to make every effort that other Arab parliaments do the same thing. There should be an effort within our region and to create additional political pressure, and I think that the Lebanese parliament and the Lebanese political leaders could push into that direction, that recognition be universal, especially starting with our region. And I do recognize the difficulties, because Turkey is now currently trying to play regional. It is playing into a new 21st century hegemonic role of the Ottoman Empire's 19th and 20th century roles. However, the interests that are commercial and financial should never outweigh the interest of justice and recognition of these crimes, and pushing for apology following recognition. I will not dwell on that, because the experience of what the ambassador called the historical justice, and what Professor Phillips has called the history commissions, and that dialogue around history must continue, and I think countries like Lebanon should play a proactive role into that direction. The third area of action, in my opinion, is justice. Playing justice through institutions. I know how complex this issue is, and I will not dwell much in it. However, as it was mentioned by Professor Phillips, the fact that 1948 Convention on Genocide does not apply retroactively is an issue of legal contention. Some of us still consider that what 1948 Convention did was a simple restatement of jus cogens, of the law of nations, and that the crime of genocide pre-existed the 1948 Convention, that only stated the basis of that crime, did not create it or establish it in 1948. And therefore, given that perspective, that legal perspective, it's not an issue of retroactivity, because genocide is a great crime against humanity in jus cogens during the time when the genocide was being practiced in Turkey. And second, the other principle is that no statute of limitation applies to such crimes. So they can be prosecuted, they can be tried irrespective of the passage of time, even 100 or 200 years following that. Why would that be important? Because I think that it will create a new avenue if developed now. There were times when there might have been some cordial relations between Turkey and Armenia. Now, I don't think that this is the case. And the only country that can sue in the International Court of Justice for genocide is the government of Armenia. As a successor of the nation of the Armenians, to claim justice and compensation from the successor of the Ottoman Empire, which is modern Turkey. I believe that this prosecution of this case is worth to be further probed and studied. And I would personally always encourage the government of Armenia to go into that direction, because if there is no such pressure, even in terms of negotiations, the government of Turkey will not feel. It does not feel that something, and even if it doesn't reach any positive conclusion, at least the case would be made, and the history would be heard in the Court of Justice. What Lebanon could do, I would very much encourage us, and particularly civil society. Mr. Phillips rightly said that the role of civil society is very important, is to organize some sort of a moot court of a trial, a moot trial of the Armenian Genocide, which could be organized by the Lebanese, but also in collaboration with other international NGOs, to put the issue of justice back on the table, even in a modelized situation, even in a moot situation. The fourth areas of action is compensation and reparation. I know how hard this matter is, especially that the Armenian, the Turkish government is not willing to repair, but the restoration, the restitution of the properties of the Armenian church is an issue there. First, the protection of the cultural heritage goods of Armenians that is left in Turkey from destruction, and second, the restitution to the Armenian church and the original Armenian owners. A friend of mine was recommending the development of a series of lawsuits, even in Turkey, on the lands that are Matruki, that were seized by the Ottoman Empire, by the Turkish state, from their Armenian original owners. There must be, in my opinion, a series of actions there so that the question of justice does take into consideration its dimension of compensation, reparation, and restitution. The fifth dimension is non-repetition. Non-repetition is an extremely important dimension of the Armenian genocide, because it puts it not in history but in the present. In the present day Middle East, what happened in the first genocide of the 20th century, the Armenian genocide, happened in the total absence of any interest from the world. Nobody saw, nobody wanted to see, nobody wanted to hear, nobody wanted to act. But I feel that now, in the early 21st century, there are ongoing genocides. In Syria, in Iraq, diversity is being destroyed in this part of the world. Minorities of Christians, Yazidis, and others are being decimated. And I think that we are not speaking of history. When the Lebanese parliamentary resolution said that the recognition, the universal recognition of the genocide is a specific condition to prevent the recurrence of such egregious crimes, and I think this sentence is extremely important now. What are we doing to prevent or to stop the current genocide? In my opinion, there are two ways to act. First, and it is the duty of the Armenians as well as the Lebanese, we must call for the recognition of the current genocide as such and prepare for their prosecution. prepare for justice to the current genocides. The Armenians should lead a coalition against genocide and for the prevention of genocides. They have done so last year, and they have started a network. However, I think that we Lebanese must engage into that network and further develop it. Had I been able to attend this year's conference, unfortunately could not because our parliament didn't send a delegation. My recommendation to that conference would be to create it as an ongoing institution. We need to form a coalition of parliamentarians for the prevention of genocide, for the fight against genocide in the world. Lebanon must play a leading role here. There must be a coalition of human rights organizations, of lawyers organizations, for the prevention of genocide. And the attention would not, I say, be switched from history to present or future, but be equally important for the past of the Armenian genocide as well as for the future of the Middle East and the world. There can be no reconciliation between any people, between any nation, if there is no preliminary justice. This cannot lead to peace if justice does not precede it. I think that the challenge is great. However, I very firmly believe that Armenia and Lebanon should collaborate with many other nations and with civil society organizations to work on this very optimistic agenda, I dare to say. And I hope that it will not take us the next 100 years for truth, reconciliation, justice and recognition of the Armenian genocide as well as the current genocides in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCarver, for your intervention. And I need one more time to emphasize here how much the government of Armenia and other community in Lebanon and other places in other countries appreciate the policy of Lebanon, the stance of Lebanon in support of the Armenian cause and the recognition by the Lebanese parliament of the Armenian genocide, and also your continuous support to advance the more recognitions, also the other issues that are related. Will be following that very recognition. And also, I want to thank you very much for the legal points that you have made here, which are extremely valid and apt in our policies and in our approaches to advance the cause of the recognition of the genocide. And I will follow that many of your advices in our daily policies, how to behave and how to act. And now, without any discrimination of our ladies, I will suggest to have a session of questions and comments in order to break it into two parts and then to proceed with your interventions and also with question and answer sessions. Please, if there are any questions and comments, questions to our first two speakers or your individual comments on what they have said or what you think on the issues that we have been discussing this morning, please.
Dr. Phillips, you're the director of the program Peacebuilding and Rights at Columbia University's Human Rights Institute. Much before 1948 and 1945, there was the Declaration of Human Rights, right? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Armenian genocide is a human rights violation par excellence. But just like the crime against humanity, which has no retroactive effect, same goes with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And besides that, it doesn't force any signing state to take an action against such issues. How the Universal Declaration of Human Rights could be invested? This is one. As for Mr. Mkhayber, Mr. Mkhayber mentioned about the 2000 statement of the Parliament. there was another statement before in 1998 which Lebanon condemned the Armenian genocide, but we all know, Mr. Khyber knows, the political situation back then in 1998 and 2000, how the Lebanese parliament took these decisions. It was, I do believe, it was a clear message from Syria to Turkey, and we know what was happening back then in on their borders. So how can Lebanon force other Arabic countries to also recognize Armenian genocide, while from 1915 till 1998, no such action was taken by the Lebanese government or Lebanese parliament, unless in 1998, and we know the political conditions back then. Thank you.
Mr. Phillips, do you believe enough is being done by the church, the Armenian government, or the political parties in the diaspora for the Armenian cause? Is it enough? And what are your suggestions? Secondly, do you believe time is in our favor, or is it not? I mean, now that we have the anniversary of 101 years, do you believe time is in our favor? And what should we do?
Mr. Khyber, you said that the Lebanese should, interfere and help the recognition of other Arab countries. I'm surprised because the Lebanese government removed Lebanese Martyrs' Days from its official holiday. Second, the current curriculum of the schools has nothing mentioned about the Ottoman massacres of the Lebanese. When I do talk with my students, the Lebanese have no clue about the starvation of the Lebanese in Mount Lebanon, where 250,000 Lebanese were killed because of that. Like, how do you think the Lebanese will be able to do this if they don't know their own history?
I totally agree with Dr. Khyber, the idea about the non-recurrence of non-repetition of genocide, which is, I think, it's a very contemporary issue. My question is, how can you evaluate the recent developments on the border of Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh? Because we saw the Armenian beheaded soldiers and tortured bodies of civilians in Armenian village of Talish, near border of Azerbaijan and Karabakh. And it's not an attempt of a new ethnic cleansing or new genocide against the Armenian people in Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh. And what kind of reconciliation are we talking about with Turkey when Ankara's first precondition is the question of Nagorno-Karabakh?
Thank you for the questions, please.
I would advise the Armenian government to file a case, and they are the Armenian government or the Armenian nation, the Armenian state is the only legal part to do that. But the Armenian genocide is not only a genocide issue; it has things to do with the land, with asking for lands lost, etc. If Armenia does that, it's a clear act of war, if you like. If they will ask for land. How this thing will be managed, how the genocide thing shall be differentiated from asking lands.
Mr. Phillips, you talked about the protocol between Armenia and Turkish and about the negotiation. I would like to have to see if you have much more clarification about why the Turkish government later on they created obstacles not signing this protocol, because Mr. President Saddam came to Lebanon and he was serious and he was acting like the Armenian Republic was approving this protocol. What changed after? What were the main reasons of the Turkish government to stop all this process? Thank you.
Let me try to answer your question first, and I'll address the others. these negotiations were being taken by professionals within Turkey's foreign ministry. And Turkish diplomacy is very professional and very skillful. I don't believe that Turkish politicians ever thought the negotiations would culminate in a deal. And the diplomats had the blessing of President Gül, who was the prime mover behind it. You remember the visits and the football diplomacy that was part of this process. There was a broader rivalry going on between Erdogan and Gül. And when Erdogan saw that the protocols were actually negotiated and signed, what's the first thing he did? He went to Baku. He gave a speech to the parliament. And he said, these protocols will never be adopted until all Azeri land is restored to the government of Azerbaijan, essentially linking Nagorno-Karabakh to the normalization of relations, which was never a part of the negotiations in the first place. And we've seen most recently this internal political problem surface again in Turkey with the dismissal of Prime Minister Davutoglu from his post. So over and over, there's evidence that Mr. Erdogan will do whatever it takes to undermine his own opposition within the AKP. And if that means appealing to ultra-nationalists in Turkey, he's prepared to do so. Let me see if I can quickly answer some of the other questions as well. There are mechanisms within the UN human rights machinery that can be brought to bear to hold Turkey accountable for its current violations of human rights under the Convention of Human Rights. In particular, these involve the deliberate killing of civilians in Turkey's southeast. There was a massacre in Cizre. The head of the UN Human Rights Council, Prince Said, made a very strong statement in which he called this massacre a crime against humanity. I believe that the UN Human Rights Council, on which Armenia serves, should put forward a resolution calling on Turkey to investigate this crime against humanity. And if the government is unable or unwilling, then the UN should establish a commission of inquiry in order to find the facts of what happened and to prosecute those responsible. And they should work up the chain of command, because I don't think these were commanders at the local level in Cizre who were given instruction. Now, it's hard to do that with Armenia taking the lead or Russia taking the lead. Both of them are seated on the council because they are concerned parties. But there is a broad base of NGOs and other activists in Geneva that could be mobilized. And I would make a special effort leading up to the meetings in June and then in September to get Turkey's violation of basic human rights on the agenda. This is all consistent with the theme of non-recurrence that you spoke about. You asked if Turkey was doing enough, if the church was doing enough. I've given an example through the UN Human Rights Council of something additional they could do. There is not a lot of open space to work on this area. We know that Armenian diplomacy is focused on recognition of the genocide. We are now going into a campaign season in the United States and then a political transition period. And as soon as the election is resolved, this issue is going to be considered by the President-elect's transition team. The Armenian American community, which numbers 1.2 million and is very savvy in its political organization, should take advantage of this period running up to the election to spotlight Armenian issues. There are states where Armenians are well represented that are critical to the election outcome. And then as soon as there is a president-elect, there should be a senior Armenian delegation which goes and briefs the President-elect transition team on what they expect the United States to do. There's a shameful track record of candidates promising recognition, and then as soon as they are elected president, changing that position. President Obama has talked about genocide recognition 27 times, I believe, as a candidate and as a senator. As president, he says, my personal views are well known. Well, if you ask me, when you become elected president of the United States, you don't have personal views. Your views become the views of the nation. And it's morally incorrect to hide behind your personal persuasion instead of stating publicly and for the record a position of the United States. There was also a question about land claims and reparations. The Armenians that I know well focus on genocide recognition. They don't talk about Western Armenia or taking territory or getting financial payments. They're more interested in the national healing that would come from acknowledgement. And I also subscribe to that view. I think genocide recognition should be the priority. There's very little likelihood that there could be a legal action taken, in my view, along the lines of what you propose. Because judicial mechanisms are highly politicized. We all know that. This doesn't occur in a vacuum. So the play should be in the court of international public opinion. In my view, the United States should lead that rather than obstruct it. And that starts with speaking truth to power about the current nature of the regime, recognizing that it is not the United States that needs Turkey, but Turkey that needs the United States, and that the U.S. should be leveraging its national interests by putting more pressure on Ankara, not only for genocide recognition, but in other areas where Turkey is actively undermining international interests and security. I hope I've answered all the questions. I'll try to.
Thank you, Professor Phillips. Some follow-up comments on your questions. First, the question of political will was asked that is the Lebanese resolution of 1998 conjuncture, because there was an interest of some kind. Let me tell you that everything you do is related to some circumstance, but after you do it, it becomes a reality. And you have to base your action on this reality. It is not debated amongst our colleagues of parliament that this is the position of our parliament. They forget or they don't look into the analysis of why that decision was taken. My same comment goes to anything we do. My comment to you, yes, of course, our history books don't mention the Lebanese famine of 1914, 1915, that had decimated a third of the Lebanese population. It was at home. It was one similar crime against humanity than the Armenian Genocide. But it is our duty to remind the Lebanese government, and I say our duty, I'm not the government. I don't write the history books. I don't make alone the policy of the Lebanese state. I try to push. Sometimes I feel that Parliament could be like a glorified NGO in a country that's not truly democratic, not truly effective. But it is everyone's duty to create a coalition of people that want to go in the same direction. And political will is not static. Political will is necessary for recognition of genocide, for the inclusion of history into a history book, and for doing only part of what I recommended that Lebanon should be doing. Now, I'm not saying this could necessarily happen, but at least we should have a policy, and policies of the state and of the world are evolving. It depends on where Turkey is now, what are its interests with the United States, with Europe, how can Lebanon leverage or not the decisions of its other Arab countries, and what other Arab countries currently have a problem with the Turkish state, which they might, for their own particular reason, just go ahead and recognize the genocide of the Armenian people. So I believe that political will is dynamic, it's not static, one has to push. My second comment goes back to your question about the non-repetition of genocide, right? And I think this is critical in two areas that I've mentioned. The one is that strategically, the historical genocide of the Armenian, its recognition, has to leave the cocoon of the Armenian identity, the Armenian issue in history, and root itself into the present and the future. Otherwise, time, and someone has asked about time, its impact on the cause, time will kill it, because time kills all actions, because it's killing the people, it's killing the evidence, it's killing the effort that we're putting in. So I think that one condition for success is to leave the cocoon of the Armenian history into the present violations of the 21st century genocides happening under our eyes. Second, and that's a corollary to the first, is to broaden the actors. Let it not be only the Armenians or the Lebanese of Armenian origin that carry the effort, but it should be broadened. We all are responsible for bringing new actors into play, civil society, as this was mentioned, but many others. My third comment and the tool, and I would dare to put it as a practical proposal for you here in the roundtable discussion. Why don't we create the network I'm talking about? We need to create a network for the prevention of genocides and the most egregious crimes against humanity. If you root it in the present and bring in politicians, bring in lawyers, civil society activists, and let that group in Lebanon link up to similar groups in the rest of the world to create a strategy against war crimes, against crimes against humanity, and against genocide. Part of it would be the recognition and justice for the Armenian genocide, because if you don't recognize the past, we'll never have a future. These crimes will repeat themselves. And in this way, you will speak to the concerns of all the Arabs. You will speak to all the Arabs, not only to the Lebanese of Armenian origin, the Syrian of Armenian origin. Because this is what they're afraid of, that the repetition would happen. What human rights institutions and mechanisms could do and what the lawyers could do, I think that there's a room for discussion. Probably my friend Rena would address some of these issues in a speech. But it is, I think it's the duty of that network against genocide and war crimes against humanity to develop a new strategy for the 21st century. The new strategy should have the twist of justice, for peace, security in the whole region. And the case of the Armenian genocide is a wound of the past, but there are many others. And I think they must be linked. That's the challenge that we have now. I hope I've answered most of the questions. Including the Nagorno-Karabakh. That's a very political one, and that must be taken up by Lebanon's foreign policy.
Let me quickly add some thoughts about non-recurrence and prevention. I don't know if you all are aware of a recently established prize called the Aurora Prize. This is something that Ruben Vardanian has underwritten. There was a ceremony in Yerevan on the 24th of April. I think this is a classic example of a civil society initiative funded by business, where Armenians are using their moral authority to call attention to other efforts to prevent genocides. So I offer great praise to Mr. Vardanian for what he's done. He's invested considerably in the prize. Remarkably, there's been very little coverage about this. So developing an international public diplomacy strategy would be important. On the subject of a network, I have a practical recommendation to you. Why doesn't the Lebanese parliament convene an international meeting of parliamentarians in the Palais des Nations next April 24th, and launch a network of legislators on the early warning and prevention of genocide. You could frame what happened to the Armenians as your calling card. You could invite members of the European Parliament, members of the US Congress, and others from around the world. I headed a group in Washington called the Parliamentary Human Rights Foundation. If you had a network of 400 or 500 members of Parliament, each introducing parallel resolutions about the Armenian genocide or other genocides as they're occurring, it would be a powerful mechanism. And it's certainly something within your capacity as legislators that you can do. You have the institutional authority to do that. So I would recommend that as a practical step. And on the subject of Nagorno-Karabakh, which also came up, I published an article in the Huffington Post in which I said that Turkish troops and Turkish equipment were on the battlefield during the recent 4-day war. If there is documentation that you all have which provides evidence of Turkey's direct participation, I'd like to have it. Because several people have pushed back and said that Turkey was not involved. I think it's going to be very important for Nagorno-Karabakh's future security to prove that this was an event conspired between Erdogan and Aliyev, and to demonstrate Turkey's culpability. So if there is such evidence, please speak to me, and I'd like to get a copy of it.
Thank you for your additional explanations and clarifications. Let me just add a piece of information. Armenia, the government of Armenia, Armenian diplomacy, have been gradually assuming that role of promotion of the prevention and of genocide around the world. And, since years, we have been offering a special resolution in Geneva, the United Nations Council on Human Rights, which has been approved already several times. So we renew that resolution every several years. And then Armenia, last year we took that initiative, and it was adopted by the UN General Assembly the day of the commemoration of the all victims of genocide. First time on December 9th last year, it became as an official event in the United Nations. And also, you likely mentioned that the Aurora Prize, which was awarded for the first time this year, and this is really a very important civil initiative, and it will be continued in a due manner, and combined with the official function of Armenian government and civilian part. I believe that Armenia eventually will become a leading force behind all those who will be pursuing the goal of prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. Now, I will proceed with our agenda, and I will ask all ladies to present their views on this issue. Please, go ahead.
A lawyer, our legal advisor was supposed to be sitting at my place, so you will have a better effect here with the background of Mr. Phillips and Mr. Hager. So I'm replacing him with the Baziadata of force majeure. Still, I would like to state a few points that I took, especially regarding the recommendations and of context, put things a bit in context. We have managed in the partnership between MoHR and the AGBU-AYA in your hospitality here. We entitled this event a human rights event. So I think it is definitely about this. This is what's at play. I was trying to talk to a friend of mine who's a competent, like a war journalist, seeing if we can get some coverage for the events to follow. And her reaction was, who cares about a genocide that happened 100 years ago with all the genocides that are happening today? And she didn't say this out of indifference, she said this with a lot of bitterness. And that shows that the acknowledgement or the quest for acknowledgement is not about the past, it's about the present. So it's really a continuum, it's really about an ongoing issue and an ongoing repetitive, like high risk of repetition, which we have the proof of every day. And I think this point is quite important. As a Lebanese, I'm asked why MoHR has decided to partner with the Armenians. And this includes two dimensions. First, it shows maybe in terms of recommendations that the Armenian community need to really reach out more to other communities, other groups, and really preach out of the box and not preach to the choir, like really step out and put themselves out there more. But also the second point, which is most important, I wasn't sure about the number of Armenian citizens in Lebanon, and I asked Mr. Fattal, my good old friend Danny, he told me there are 150,000 Armenians in Lebanon. And I was saying, I thought there were 200, but still around me I was saying all the time there are 200 Armenians in Lebanon and they are all Lebanese. So this really makes it, this really puts it in context and justifies why this is a human rights event in Lebanon. I also would like to say that denial is, the Turkish denial is the last stage of genocide. So it is in itself a crime, and I think it's very important to underline this and to communicate around denial as a crime in itself. Derogation, disavowal, denial, and these are crimes because, in fact, when someone denies that they killed you, they are denying that you ever existed. If you didn't die, it means you never existed. And this point, I think, is important to focus on. I don't know what the legal shape that would take, but I think there's something there that is interesting to ponder upon. My second point is also about the project itself to push for recognition under the title of human rights. I find it quite alarming and scary when I hear, when I see, we are all contaminated by the horrors and the crimes that we are witnessing and that are happening really around us. It's not so far out. We do have 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And we became somehow blasé when we see genocides, people being slaughtered in front of us on TV and whatnot. And I am called naive for pushing for a meta-structure of human rights in Lebanon, and we are totally in phase and in harmony with Mr. Khayba's project. And I think the relativity of things and reality check is important. What is shocking is not to push for human rights. What is shocking is to get used to horrors and crimes and genocides around us. And this is in direct connection with my friend, the journalist, and her remark. On the other hand, regarding the talks with the Turks, I think it is indeed complicated to dialogue with someone who is deaf, blind, and who shows so much bad faith, and who has no willingness for insight or for looking inward and dealing with their own past, let alone what they have done to the past of others. So it's also complicated, again, to dialogue with someone who pretends you never existed because they insist that they never, murdered you. So it's as if also they are saying they got what they deserved, even though it never happened. So it really drives one crazy to understand how to put these two together, because denial works in mysterious ways, and it's a very powerful mechanism that is used and abused and employed, obviously, for political reasons. So it's a human right, of course, because it's about the right to exist, and it's about the right to exist today. So it's not a human rights that is demanding the acknowledgement of something that happened 100 years ago. It's the right to exist today. So it's about the present. The genocide, the Armenian genocide, is about the present. The denial of the Armenian genocide is happening today. And it has been happening every single day for the last 100 years. So I think it's important to ask, therefore, for acknowledgement and recognition of genocide and for the acknowledgement of its denial. I don't know how that would translate in, in legal terms or, the technicalities of it. On the other hand, regarding the complication of talking to the perpetrator, I think my recommendation would be like what I would feel is that it would be interesting to fortify connections and lobby with Turkish intellectuals, so to penetrate really the Turkish system through the intellectuals and the scholars who wrote about the truth, because this is what scholars do. They document the truth and they want to, publish the truth, speak the truth, and they got in trouble for doing so. They are considered as traitors because, of the ultra-nationalism of Turkey. Also, we need to be aware, the Armenian community needs to be aware that probably with all the lobbying they are doing, they are countered by even more lobbying, more aggressive lobbying from the Turks to prevent acknowledgement. And the Turks have lobbied aggressively, maybe with more will, because there is more at stake for them to acknowledge than for the Armenians to get acknowledgement. They have lobbied politically, diplomatically, in the artistic scene, creativity, the intellectuals. In their schools, they teach young Turks that the genocide is a myth. They censor the writers, etc. So they are really willfully lobbying against the acknowledgement, probably more than the Armenians are lobbying for the acknowledgement. So I think this is an important point as a recommendation to really to really build stronger connections and to build bridges with intellectuals, with Turkish intellectuals that are activists, to tell the truth, that really thrive and put their lives at stake to push for the acknowledgement of their own country of the genocide. I think it's also important in the context of Lebanon, for the Armenian community to lobby for public opinion. In the public, this is David's point earlier, and also Mr. Khayber's. I think it's really important to do that, because I also tell this remark every year around the anniversary of the genocide. I see banners in Armenian quarters, and not more out there in the city or outside the city. So it stays in-house, and this is beautiful because it keeps the memory alive, but it doesn't do much in terms of attracting energies and attracting allies and really making it, for the wider community interest and demand, and it gives it like a limited importance on that level, on the level of effectiveness and pushing the agendas forward. My last point also is to echo with what my friend Hassan was saying earlier, is really the coalition with the Armenian, between the Armenian community and all the satellites that become powerful allies, whether it be institutions of human rights. They are probably doing that. I don't know what the strategy is. I'm sure this is happening, but probably more so. And definitely probably learn or get some serious partnerships or advice from those who pushed and made it possible to recognize the Jewish genocide. I think it's important also to do that, because it's shared experience, but one got recognition and one did not. So probably there are lessons to be learned there. Thank you. That's all I would say from my part.
problems and also the way out. Now, please, Mr. Tekin, the floor is yours.
Hello, good noon, exactly. I'm not a historian whatsoever, and every history, all the history about the Armenian genocide I learned comes from the reading newspapers, all newspapers. I just read the British newspapers. Since I'm not the product of an Armenian school, for me genocide was just 1915-16. But when I started reading these newspapers, they kept saying, the journalists kept saying, as it happened before, as it happened before. So I started going backwards, and the oldest item that I have comes from 1876 in the New York Times, when the title, the headline says, "Fresh New Massacres." So these massacres were not only 1915-16. Unfortunately, even the Armenians are focusing more on these 2 or 3 years. And the Turks are taking advantage of this, saying that there was a war, they took Russia's side, all that denial reasons that they're giving. You were talking about genocide. I'm going to water down my lecture that I'm giving the day after tomorrow in London. It's about my research. But if you do read the headlines, they don't use the word genocide. They use extermination of a race. They say wiping out of a nation. And I think these are, the definitions of genocide. And just to reiterate, in 1895, New York Times wrote in the headline, "Another Armenian Holocaust." The word Holocaust was used in 1895 when Sultan Abdul-Hamid was killing Armenians, because when I was reading these newspapers, I found out that the issue, the Armenian question, had become the carrot on the stick for Europe and Russia. Whenever they wanted to pressure Turkey with anything they wanted, it was the Armenian reforms that had been, in the Berlin Treaty, prior to that, the San Stefano Treaty. And every time they wanted something, they pressured Turkey with, remember the Armenian reforms that you promised? And this made Sultan Abdul-Hamid probably provoked into saying, to get rid of the Armenian question, we should get rid of the Armenians. So it's not the genocide of 1915-16. We hear a lot about, it was the Tashnak, it was the Armenian whatever. But before that, what was the reason? They don't tackle. And the historians don't touch upon these. I consider these genocide as well. It's very nice to say never again, but if you read the headlines, and I'm going to, as I said, the oldest one I have is 76. It says fresh new massacres. 1890, Erzurum massacre, Armenians slaughtered. I'm not going to read the whole article. Armenians murdered. 1893 in Turkey, hundreds of bodies thrown into the harbor of Constantinople. 1894, massacre of Armenians, horrible tales of butchery perpetrated by the Turks. I can go on with these. It wasn't just 1915 and 16. Unfortunately, when World War I broke out, they made a lot of promises to the Armenians. It was very nice that in the House of Lords in Britain, 7 times the issue of the Armenians and the liberation of the Armenians was discussed. And every single time they promised that the Armenians would be liberated. In the House of Commons, more than 70 times between 1914 and 23, the Armenian issue, the murders, the liberation were discussed. Balfour himself promised, the prime ministers kept promising and promising. But between Sèvres and Lausanne, different political interests came into being. Britain was a little bit afraid that they were losing their Indian Muslim support, and that was very important for them. If you read the Times of London, there are probably over 75 letters written by Indian Muslim community heads, letters to the editor, saying that it wasn't like the same thing that they're saying now, that it's the Armenians who killed. The Turkey is getting unfair treatment with these negotiations. Istanbul should not be taken by Europe. All this talk keeps coming up. And even Gandhi at one point said, there will be mutiny if you punish Turkey. This is in 1920. it's the political interest that always trumps humanity. And this is why I'm the cynical person here, that I don't believe in civil society anymore. No matter how much people talk about it, it's the politicians who ruin everything. At the end, they are the ones who are taking decisions. They are the ones who, at the end, decide, Britain said, we got Mesopotamia, we have a lot of responsibilities, let someone else take the responsibility of the Armenian mandate. Every single country that was approached for the mandate refused for political reasons, even the United States Congress. And as I said, the word Holocaust was used. If not genocide, the Holocaust was used by Churchill, it was used by the Prime Minister of Britain in a book, and it was used by the New York Times several times, not only once, prior to the 1915-16. I'm not going to talk about the 17 pages that I have, but this is, in a nutshell, my cynicism about civil society and what people can really do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Natalia. Are there any questions or comments?
It's a little bit more, it's a little bit related to Katya's introduction. So my question is for Professor Davis. Do you think that today Turkey military power and the Middle East environment play and give Turkey more advantage on the talks, and as well as on the US Congress, they have more, not power, but more political relation?
Okay, all of us are speaking about the genocide, but the lady are working for a long time in the human rights issue. Do you believe that are there any governments in the world that believe in human rights? Putting aside the political issues, commercial, economic, and military, and so on, so issues, religious issues, there are nations who believe in human rights. I don't think there is only one country which has a government that believes in human rights without the political and economic and social issues.
I think that your answer is in your question somehow, and also my friend sitting to my left was kind of answered that. It's true that unfortunately it's always about the political interest, and unfortunately they almost never coincide with the right thing to do. I don't know what else to say, but this is why we are pushing so hard to create, to make the Lebanese government more involved. Mr. Mkhayber has much more experience than me. He's also part of the parliament, etc. But and I agree a little bit with the point about the civil society, but it's very important to continue lobbying. Lebanon has signed and has contributed in writing the Charter of Human Rights. So today the question is also for us, the Lebanese, regarding our own identity. We need to decide who we are, because our reality is not in harmony anymore with what we pretend we are and with the values we pretend we are. So it's about putting ourselves and our government in front of its own responsibility for changing in a dangerous way who we are, our values, our beliefs in human rights, in all its details, even though they were reserved. I'm sure Mr. Mkhayber knows much more about all this than me, but I do know that there is a need for a infrastructure for human rights that takes the form of independent commission or also ombudsman, or there are many ways to create and reinforce human rights as values within the government. The government is not an entity that is not a concept. There are people in there who are, some of them have integrity, have values, and actually have passion and believe in what they're doing. You have one of them sitting on your left side.
Just the political issue. The Lebanese government did an excellent thing for the Lebanese of the Armenian Genocide recognition. But you know, before all day, it was the 6th of May. The same Lebanese government let the Lebanese forget the Turkish punishment that they were the Turkish Ottoman and you know what happened in the 6th of May. The Lebanese new generation don't know about the 6th of May anything. So the second issue that the lady also mentioned, hunger, let's say, what happened in North Lebanon, there's 200,000 people, Christian people, died from Christian some road because they had extra way to go to Golan Heights and bring their food. There was, there were people who were bringing their food to them, but okay, they lost 200,000 up 450. And the Lebanese government, the Lebanese culture mentioned them just in 3 or 4 lines or half a page that a hunger happened, and they don't mention the Turks, at Beirut and took their food and took everything they had. They took their gold, they took their money. Nobody mentioned this, even in Lebanon. The Maronite Lebanese, the Orthodox, there's a lot of work done on that, but we have to start from what they have to do as Lebanese for themselves, then what they have to do for us.
Actually, to answer your question, as a psychoanalyst, I spent 7 years researching about the possibility of truth and reconciliation in Lebanon. And the objective, besides the never again in Hamas or in this formula, is about building collective memory. It's about building collective memory, which is the basis of identity. You know who you are, and you relate to your fellow citizen because you have a collective memory, and because you know you both have an idea about what happened, and not one thinks something and the other thinks the opposite, and they both take it for the absolute truth. The problem is exactly that the Lebanese history books taught at schools do not mention even the Lebanese Civil War. It stops at the independence of Lebanon from France. So it's really funny to stop writing your history once you become independent, you have nothing more to say. And this is also one of our problems, one of Lebanon's problems, because anyway, I genuinely believe that the Civil War never truly ended. It just mutated and took other forms, and all the components of conflicts are still very much active and kicking. And we have outbursts of violence where the old dynamics are reactivated exactly as is, like they are frozen in time. So we are stuck also in repetition. It's a complicated matter, but in short, definitely, history books matter because they build a collective memory. And Lebanon has a law of unified school books, so each school does not have the right to teach students the book of their choice. And therefore, they will not be teaching history, contemporary history anytime soon, because I don't see how they will all sit together and agree on one version of our recent history. So the enemy is a matter of point of view, and you have fractured memory, you have fragmented memory, and therefore you have fragmented identities. And therefore you have a very high risk of ongoing violence and repeating the Civil War and fratricide. Only they don't know it's fratricide. They think they're killing the enemy, who happens to be, within your own self.
We are speaking about human capital when we speak genocide. We forget that we have land that we have lost. And most importantly, in my book, Armenian Bankers in the Ottoman Empire, I show that during the last 1,000 years after the fall of Ani, all the capital and the capitalists and the bankers that were in Istanbul in Turkey, they lost all this money after the genocide, which we are mentioning about. I think this is also a complete genocide. The human capital is not enough. There is the genocide of the properties, lands of everyone, and the capital, money, which is appreciated by one of the professors in the University of Nebraska, Dr. Dermatosian, for over $1 trillion today. Thank you.
I don't believe in giving the civil society that. I don't believe in giving the civil society or the NGOs that image of being that helpless, or else we're contradicting ourselves. I do believe civil society has a big role and we're not being fair towards them, as well as to the states. You know, we cannot ignore the human rights in Scandinavian countries. So, or else you're leading us to the even nothingness or Abasi in Arabic. You cannot say that we can do nothing, only the politics that can do something. Today are the results of the Sunday's elections. The difference between the old votes that gathered with all political parties combined together against the civil society list is only 7,000 votes. So civil society can do something. Thank you.
I will start where Dr. Renes finished. I think I may argue actually that in case the idea, the concept of genocide was disseminated throughout the decades, the past decades in the Middle East, we wouldn't have, it's a tentative issue of course, we wouldn't have the mass killings, massacres, whatever is going on, or at least there would be more likeliness, less likeliness, let's say, that such massacres, such mass killings would happen. But I have two other issues to raise. One of them is the equation of, I think about Turkey, on Turkey's behalf, that why should we recognize the genocide? Well, in economics, or in real life actually, we do something because we think that the consequences, the positive consequences, are far better than the negative consequences. I think at this stage, Turkey, I may interpret actually, that Turkey is thinking that, well, it will lose a lot if it recognizes. So I think, on the Armenian side, we are not that powerful to offering something which would counterbalance its losses. So this is why I think that the Armenians will not be able to do much in pushing Turkey to recognize the Armenian genocide. And this is where I want to raise a question to Mr. Phillips, that here comes the international community. I think the pressure should come from the international community rather than from the Armenian. Of course, the Armenian side will push, but I just spoke about the equation. This is one question. The other question I have is the following. I don't think that recognition of genocide, in our case, in my personal view, it has, of course, it has a lot to do with my wounds being healed, but I don't think it stops there. I think it goes far beyond that, Mr. Phillips, in the sense that in my modest interpretation, even if I don't speak about land retribution, land reparation, whatever, I think what I see at this moment is that Turkey is continuing to its policies of genocide in a different manner, politically. What it declared concerning the April 2nd, April 5th war in Karabakh, it stated that it's right behind Azerbaijan. What I want to say is that it goes far beyond healing wounds. If Turkey recognizes the genocide, it states already that it will not repeat something similar, and it will definitely change its foreign policy towards Armenia and the Armenians. This is what I think. So it goes far beyond healing wounds, Mr. Phillips. Thank you.
I'd like to follow-up thoughts on your presentations, Lena and your Katja. My first comment is this dichotomy which I often hear between civil society and politics. Is something that I find surprising, having personally been from civil society to politics. I was, for those that don't know, I was very much in still involved in human rights issues. I think that human rights is at the core of politics. It's nothing else. And it's a fallacy to believe that if you're a civil society in the area of human rights or anything else, you do something nice, clean, and different from politics. This is hardcore, difficult politics. And I think it's wrong to start believing that there is a fence between those that are in politics and those that are in civil society. They must collaborate. And I think that this is a challenge on areas of fighting corruption, or bringing up democracy, or protecting human rights. And there should be a paradigm shift in one's mind first. That certainly, when we speak of what we're talking about, we're not talking in la la land. We of course know what we're talking about. It's a lot of interests that are there. And Turkey will not come and kiss the Armenian president or the Armenian people and say, we're sorry, out of just kindness or respect for fundamental principles of human rights. My second comment is about cynicism. Please, cynicism is very good, because it's a call for reality. And I think the problem is not cynicism, it's action. Because a passive cynic is a pessimist, and that leads to nothing. But an active cynic is an optimist, because it can lead to something. Being cynical is not the question. The question for me is, what do you do? We need people like you that have to write down things as they happen. We need politicians to take a look. It doesn't work this way, including in the US. And we're into the game of the big players, right? Turkey is a big player. We're not talking about Sudan, we're not talking about Lebanon. It's a major regional power with huge influence. So the question is to approach it from that perspective. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's political. Yes, human rights is not the number one priority of any nation, including the big nations. However, what do you do? That's the problem. What is your action and how do you turn your action? I like something that you praised, Reina. You said, let's learn from the Jewish Holocaust. What did they do? Because that's a successful story of a genocide that found some recognition, certainly, huge recognition. People now criminalize the non-recognition of the Jewish Holocaust, most European nations. I think we certainly need to learn from that experience. And that teaches us collaboration and coordination, sustained work, connection to the politicians, and we need to work in politics. It's 100% politics. And one needs to learn. This is why I truly believe that it has become time to create a coalition, such a coalition between politicians, any activists, historians, what have you, and bring the issue back to the present and the future. Otherwise, we get into the problems that Reina has mentioned. I'm concerned by the crimes today. I'm not interested by history. But we need to answer that we're not talking history, we're talking future. And how can we bring on board new people? We mentioned civil society, but what do you think? What about the media? Media is very important. What about other victims? Now there are other victims. Did any of you call the Yazidis that are the victims of a genocide now? Did any of you call the other patriarchs of the Syriacs, of the Orthodox, of the Copts, that also are the victims of the genocide today? I think there are a series of actions, and the political powers shift. That's also part of political reality. And the difficulty is sustained action. We need to have sustained action. You've waited 100 years. I'm not saying that we need to wait for another 100, but I'm truly calling for cynical action.
this the actual acts of massacres or horrors happening in the Middle East or other world, all it has to do with to get preventions, not to have such acts. And what you said, that we are struggling for the recognizing of the genocides is for the future. What we understand also. But for me, really, we have another concept for this issue. For us, the genocide is not an issue of prevention only. It's not only a political issue. It's not an issue between the strategic interests of powerful countries. For us, it's an issue of humanity, of values. As Armenians, on the day of 24th of April, first we remember our ancestors. We remember the massacres. We remember people that were killed for their beliefs, to prevent their traditions, their language, the church, the Christianism, everything. It's a question of values. It's not only a question of political issues. So for us, recognize the genocide is not only for the future. It's not a question of prevention. It's also remembering our ancestors. It's the human relation between the massacres and the political issues or the political meaning or political strategic interest of the genocide. You know, maybe it's I don't know if you meant by that for us, genocide is today and is for the future. It's not the issue for me. Something completely different. I don't know if I was clear about the difference. It's not a history. It's not a pure history. It's a value. It's a human value. You know what I mean by that?
Randy, did you want to respond to this?
No, I feel that you can do a better job.
So we shouldn't kid ourselves about conditions in Turkey. We talk about reaching out to Turkish intellectuals. I could count on one hand the number of Turkish intellectuals who are willing to use the term Armenian genocide and speak about this publicly. And there are several reasons for this. Most pronounced, the fact that they'll end up in jail. Article 301 of the Penal Code makes denigrating Turkishness a criminal offense. So if you're a scholar in Turkey and you want to publish or speak publicly or give interviews about the Armenian genocide, count on 3 to 5 years in prison. On the subject of curriculum, has anybody studied Turkish textbooks? Is there any equanimity or honesty in the way they describe the events? Of course not. A dear friend of mine, who was the rector of Bosphorus University, Usta Erdogan, was an exchange student at MIT. And he went to the library and he discovered volumes of text about the Armenian genocide that had been written. And this was the first time he ever heard about it. He described to me his shock to go into the stacks and find all of this history that had been denied in Turkey through the industry of denial. So we should study the textbooks, we should refute them. But the Ministry of Education in Turkey is one of the most ultra-nationalistic government agencies. So reforming text, reforming education and curriculum, extremely difficult. Turkey spends millions of dollars each year in Washington alone hiring high-priced lobbyists. These are former members of Congress who are in close contact with their colleagues, and they're paid by the Turkish government to represent Turkey's interests, which include Holocaust and genocide denial. And every April 24th, there are hearings, and the Congress will invite witnesses. Turkey sends delegations and delegations of their foreign officials and members of parliament. and civil society who make the rounds, telling Turkey's official line. So if you want to counteract that, you need to be equally organized. You need to devote the resources. Members of Parliament can go and meet with members of Congress and share their views. But we need to be steely-eyed in recognizing that denial isn't something that occurs on a day. It's something which is institutionalized in Turkey 365 days of the year. There are countries in Europe that make Holocaust denial a crime. France has made denial of the Armenian Genocide a crime. If there's something that you want to do as legislators, it would be reaching out to your lawmaking colleagues in other countries and urging them to adopt similar legislation. That's something practical that could be done. And I would just make a comment about terminology. You discussed the use of the term Holocaust. I can tell you as a Jewish American that we feel that the Holocaust is something that was unique to the Jewish people because of the scale, the systematic nature. I'm unabashed in using the term genocide, but I don't think that you want to reintroduce a new element into the debate as to whether or not the genocide was a Holocaust, because you want to be working with your partners and friends instead of raising questions that might distract you from your core mission. So I would stick to the term Armenian Genocide. Frankly, gaining recognition thereof is hard enough.
For 100 years, we as Armenians all over the world and the international community, we've been doing everything every year. We're trying, at least we're trying. Conventions, reconciliation acts, foreign governments, intermediaries, activities in Lebanon, in all the countries where there's a big Armenian community. But we talk and talk and talk, we plan and plan and plan, but I don't want to use the word we failed, but I cannot consider us having succeeded compared to the huge genocide impact on the Armenian nation. This is why I've given it a lot of thought. I mean, when negotiations happened, like the Secretary to the States, Clinton, she was negotiating between Armenia and Turkey. But how could she deal when she is not allowed herself by her government to recognize genocide? How can she be fair in those negotiations? There will be a limit to everything she's doing or everything she's saying, even though personally she might believe otherwise. But what we have never mentioned the Turkish people. I think the biggest pressure which could be exerted on the Turkish government could come from the local Turkish people, not just the local intellectuals in Turkey, but the people. We have to awaken the people. We have to educate the common people, the 60 million. They will, at the end, join together and ask questions to their government. And I think this would be more efficient than any other negotiation. They will exert pressure on their own government. Thank you.
Can I just respond to that last point quickly?
Yeah.
We mobilized the chambers of commerce in Turkey, all the provinces adjoining Armenia, to call for dialogue and reconciliation. Those politicians were universally condemned by the government and marginalized. Ultimately, they were removed from office or put in jail. They have a direct stake in opening the border to normal travel and trade so they can sell their goods and stimulate their local economy. But at the central government level, there was a systematic effort to marginalize.
I know, but it could work on just in time. I believe more and more people will be aware of what the Turkish in 1915, 1920, 1890 have done to the Armenian people. And they cannot deny it. When there is an educated community, they cannot deny it, even if it's Turkish community.
So I think the other part of your point, which is very important, we need to talk to Turks about what happened.
Exactly, exactly.
I have to say that when we announced the Turkish-Armenian Reconciliation Commission, I expected in Turkey a lot of rejection. And I expected that in Armenia, a lot of acceptance. It was in fact the exact opposite.
Out of fear, right?
Pardon?
Out of fear.
Well, I think out of politics.
Politics
And we arranged with Turkish officials to make statements in support. We arranged with Armenian religious leaders to make statements in support. Nobody did that when the announcement of TARC was made. And there's a simple choice. Are you going to insist that Turkey accept the genocide, pay reparations, and give back territory before you start talking to them? Or are you going to start talking to them and make demands, including genocide recognition? I think it's clear in any reasonable world that you have to have a dialogue. And then make, through the exchange of personal histories, Turks will become aware about what happened. And that's how you gain genocide recognition. It'll be through a people-to-people process.
dialogue not on the official or political level, dialogue on the lower people's level.
So that's an important point. People to people, you can have a dialogue where sides are listening. And whether we like it or not, the Turks also have a story to tell. And for many Turks, they too have a tragic history. It's not a genocide, but in their view, they were a great empire that was diminished. Many of them were relocated, many died. So if you want to have a dialogue, you need to listen as well as to speak. That's how you gain mutual understanding, which ultimately will result in a recognition of the genocide by the people of Turkey and finally by their government.
I'm going to continue from where you stopped. For 100 years, we have, I think we are stuck in the, if you take the sequence of events, the commemoration of the genocide, recognition, reparation, and reconciliation. After 100 years, we are still between commemoration and recognition. So I think it's very important to bring around us more allies, non-allies, especially the intellectuals and media. But in order to do so, we need to be more, approach needs to be more, less aggressive. Because as you mentioned, in many cases we have read a lot of hatred towards Turks, regardless whether it's the country, government, or people, ordinary people. So it's difficult for Armenians to sit together with Turks and talk about this issue. But in the last few years, we have met a lot of Kurds or Turks from Armenian origins, and it is very important to go through this process. But we need also to understand that for the Turks, as you mentioned, it's something new. They haven't heard about it. So we need to go to their level and start anew. This needs a lot of effort, it needs time, it needs diplomacy. Some of the other challenges that we are facing as Armenians in the diaspora, we need to keep the Armenians in the diaspora active. Lebanon is one of the biggest diaspora, it's one of the biggest diasporas regarding the Armenians. And one of the major challenges is to keep the youth, the new generations involved. And also I want to talk about the motives to bring in Turkey, to recognize, and about also tackling the outcomes. We need to be realistic about the outcomes, what's going to happen next and when is next. And we also need to be ready when the winds of change will come. Like it happened in Iraq and now in Syria, we need to be prepared. So there is a lot of work to be done, but in order to do that, we need a strategy.
So I don't think the strategy at this juncture can focus on bilateral contact. Because there's no one in the Turkish government that will engage with Armenian counterparts on this issue right now. I can tell you that when we started this process in the late 1990s, I was at a dinner party with a leading group of Turkish business people, including some of the biggest in the country. And I brought up the Armenian issue. There was a dead silence in the room. Nobody wanted to talk about it because everybody knows that when you refer to the Armenian issue, it's a code word for genocide recognition. So we started a process of dialogue. We involved women's groups, environmentalists, students, professors, business people, and we developed a movement in Turkey to talk about Turkish-Armenian relations. And that movement is still ongoing. There are still a good number of Turks who will engage, not on genocide recognition, but on other related bilateral issues. So when we speak about civil society, there's an opening. And this shouldn't take another 100 years. We shouldn't have this seminar 100 years from now. But the fact that we are here talking about it, that the media is covering it, it's building an awareness in Lebanon. I have to tell you, the reason I accepted the invitation to come is because I think it's important that people everywhere mobilize their actions around mutual understanding leading to genocide recognition. And speaking about it here and doing conferences and reaching out to different people is part of that process, then we should all participate in it. But we should do that with our eyes wide open because there are Turkish ultranationalists who are very hostile to this dialogue. I remember one former Turkish ambassador met with our Armenian group, and he said the problem with Armenian churches in Turkey, there were just too many of them for us to destroy.
Yes.
So let's not kid ourselves. And the attitude of Turks towards Armenians is racist, it's nationalist, and it's going to take time to overcome what is a deeply hostile relationship. And that doesn't come from strength. Turks are not hateful of Armenians because they're proud of themselves. It's because they know they committed a crime, and they compensate for that by being overly aggressive and overly hateful. And as the psychologists among us will attest, it will take time through dialogue to move from where we are to where we want to be.
My question was related to the very last point that Professor Phillips said. I was going to bring it also to genocide pieces she mentioned about the psychological study she had done. I want to open a bracket from a psychological perspective. We are always stressing on genocide term, and we should do that as it has its political consequences on the Turkish side. But what about the Turkish perspective? It is not easy psychologically. It's never easy to accept that he or she is a daughter or a granddaughter or son of someone, a grandfather who committed a genocide. So this is a psychological issue. We're using the genocide, we're stressing on genocide, but it's a double sword in this case, I believe. Thank you.
Can I say something to that? So we brought into our talk psychologists, Turkish and Armenian psychologists. And both sides said, why are you here? You're going to psychoanalyze us? You're going to put us on the sofa and talk to us? It was not a very fruitful discussion. But the underlying point you made is critical. If we're going to make headway with Turks and in Turkey, we have to understand their psychology. And I'm by no means an advocate or an apologist for Turkish psychology, but let me share with you their perspective. Turks have a deeply noble self-image. They see themselves as hospitable, as gracious. They can't imagine that their grandparents committed such a terrible crime. And they view the term genocide as equivalent to what Hitler did to the Jews. Now, how could we, as Turks, given our nobility, ever commit such a crime? So It will take a lot of effort, a lot of consistent dialogue in order to address the truth, get Turks to see things as they are, not as they were taught them to be. And that's why a consistent dialogue on all levels is critical, and a patient approach is necessary. I didn't expect when we launched the TARC in 1999 that I'd be sitting here in Beirut by your side talking about the negative and positive lessons learned. So we're going to have to maintain this effort. Ultimately, human interaction is the best way of raising awareness and sensitivity. And if we want to gain genocide recognition, that probably is going to happen one person at a time, rather than an official acknowledgement, especially by this government, which is so hostile to external efforts.
I have one last question for you, David. I was just wondering, when you said you can count the Turkish intellectuals on one hand who named genocide, we meant Turkish in Turkey or worldwide?
I was speaking about Turks in Turkey.
Okay, so
if they're living outside of the country, it's because they fear being arrested or killed. And maybe because they're advocates of genocide recognition.
So maybe it's good for the child of Turks living outside Turkey who are trying to tell the truth as intellectuals. I think it's very important to have them on your side.
And one thing that the Turkish government can control is social media. So if you can reach out to Turks outside in the world community, get them to use social media to raise their voices and share their perspective, that has a much greater impact than me going to Istanbul and giving a speech or us sitting here. To have Turkish voices raised and amplified through a virtual community has a huge impact in ways that we can't measure, but over time we will be sure to know.
Can I add something? You know, we were talking about cooking with the first problem is that we have to start with ourselves. Unfortunately, Armenians have this problem of leadership. We don't know who represents us. Even TARC, I remember I worked for Growing the Armenian News Network, and when we interviewed one Grigoryan, was very arrogant that he represented the Armenians. And I wrote a long article against what he had said. One of the reasons that TARC didn't work for the Armenians and the Armenians were against TARC was that people nominate themselves as leaders, as representatives of Armenians. And if you look around, none of the parties or the leaders were elected. They are usually appointed. Usually, I'm not going to generalize it. So, yeah, we need to talk to Turks, but we have to start with ourselves. Who represents us? Who's going to talk on our behalf? Coming to the social media, I think that they still run in Turkey. From time to time they ban it, so I'm not sure where it stands now. Unfortunately, youth are not educated enough, even the Armenians. On Facebook, whenever I place articles about the Azeris or the Turks, most Armenian youth use the F word instead of coming up with real evidence to find a dialogue. The problem, we have to start with ourselves and to educate our youth before we start trying to educate the Turks. I'm sorry about the negativity with the Armenians, but this is where we have to start as well.
So agree that there needs to be a dialogue among our
Yeah.
Let me just clarify a couple of points of fact. Nobody in TARC selected themselves. I selected them.
That's not what one I said.
So maybe he misspoke.
Yeah, probably. The response was to his interview with us.
So I selected them. None of them were paid any money.
No,
And they were not in the group to negotiate on behalf of a larger Armenian community or the Armenian government. They were there in their personal capacities, expressing their own private personal views. So there are a lot of misconceptions about TARC. At tonight's speech, I'll try to address them a little bit more systematically. But I think that was the first and only organized effort to engage Turks and Armenians in a dialogue since the genocide had occurred. And as a result of that, it was a lightning rod for controversy. There are now dozens of organized efforts for Turks and Armenians to get together and do things. So you can't engage in this work without taking some criticism You have to be courageous and bold and visionary. But you also need support of governments. And I can say the U.S. government supported us. There were 7 other governments who financed us. The Armenian government and the Turkish government were both fully informed and supportive of what we were doing. And that was a moment of opportunity. The situation is different today, but we can learn from both the successes and failures of those previous efforts as we think about our role as dialogue participants.
Excuse me, just very short, who's going to lead us? There is no question in our
Elections.
Excuse me?
Elections among us.
No.
There was a talk about Armenian International Parliament something.
The government in Armenia shows us the way and we follow. It should be unified and well thought and organized. Not political parties, not individuals, no one. But the government should have a standpoint and then we have to follow that.
Is going to be somewhere else, right? This is not the exact topic of our
We have to learn
discussion.
that the Republic of Armenia and the diaspora have different interests.
We should
Economically, they have other interests, you know, so we should
find a common ground.
Let me wrap up our discussion of this morning. I believe it's not only my impression that we had a very fruitful discussion. We touched upon almost on every aspect of this issue of the Armenian genocide. We also explored a bit a broader approach to that issue, not confined only to the Armenian cause, but we have tried to see the human rights aspect and then the other more important aspects of this topic and this problem. But on my personal capacity, I would like now to show a bit of male solidarity at this part of the table, because I don't expect from our ladies to be that much of pessimistic about the prospects of human rights, the protection of human rights, because neither the political power nor the human rights are given. You know, they continuously interact, and in order to secure the human rights, you need to fight all the time. And the civil society nowadays has much more important role to play in that regard. Yesterday I was reading an article by Mr. Sullivan, who was bringing the point that one of it was related to the phenomenon of Mr. Trump, the candidate of the United States President, that when the democracy matures and reaches to a higher level of maturity, then it's a very conducive environment for a tyrant to come in and to seize the power. So it's not that certain that what kind of democracy we have been pursuing so far and what has been happening. So it's a continuous interaction and continuous fight between those two levels of the society. So from my personal experience, when I have been talking to my colleagues, Turkish diplomats, I haven't got that much of a pessimistic approach, because I never heard from any one of them a complete denial. There is a certain level of understanding within Turkish society that they have done something wrong to Armenians, which have been their own citizens at that time during the Ottoman Empire. But they don't know how to proceed, how to get that barrier to recognize that, and how to find a way of recognizing their own misdeeds towards Armenians, and then to proceed with the reconciliation and the coexistence in that part of the world. So it's not a lost case, to my understanding, to my own impression, that the Turkish society, even at the level of government,
there are different groups that have that understanding, and we need to count on that and also continue. We never thought that what we have been doing for the last 100 years, for a century, was going to be an easy thing. And it's not going to be an easy thing, and we don't anticipate that next day the Turks will turn completely the other way and recognize the Armenian genocide and pay retribution or restore the rights of Armenians. The only proof that will be successful on in what we have been doing for so long time is the resilience of the Armenian people around the world, in different Armenian communities of the diaspora. Also, the most recent proof is the Armenian independence, and we need to nurture those both and take all the assistance and help and advice from our friends. Also here, particularly here in Lebanon, how to take this issue forward and how to achieve the goal, that our common goal that we have set for ourselves, and we will be willing to pursue to be successful. So thank you again to you all, particularly to our speakers today, and also to all of those who actively participated and contributed to this discussion, and also all who are present in this hall.
I'd just like to thank you all for coming. This was a session brought to you by we worked hard to bring this brainstorming session, which I feel was quite fruitful, I hope. We carry on. Tonight we have another panel at the USG. Okay, I hope you can make it. And tomorrow we have another conference also at the AGBU. So we carry on with our efforts and hope to see you all.